The string quartet played Vivaldi as sunlight filtered through the glass ceiling of the Reed Estate's winter garden. Roses in ivory and blush bloomed along the aisle, and guests whispered about the extravagance of it all. Victor Reed's wedding was destined to make headlines. Cameras flashed, champagne flowed. The ceremony was moments from beginning. And then, a sound, a low hum in the sky. People craned their necks as a sleek black helicopter descended onto the private helipad just beyond the ceremony lawn. A gust of wind scattered petals and tousled carefully styled hair. The music faltered. The bride, standing just beyond the garden arch, froze mid-step. The doors of the helicopter opened, and from the sleek aircraft stepped a woman in a jet-black sheath dress, heels clicking against stone. Her hair was swept back, her lips painted deep red. In each hand, she held the palm of a child, a boy and a girl, 5 years old, identical except for the tilt of their chins and the defiance in their eyes. Victor's breath caught. His world didn't shatter with a bang. It cracked in complete echoing silence. The woman locked eyes with him across the garden. Not a hint of fear, only steel, only knowing. "Victor," she called calmly, "you forgot something." Guests turned, whispered, gasped. Victor stumbled. Forward a step, his bride-to-be whispering frantically at his side, pulling at his sleeve. But he didn't look at her. He only saw the woman he'd thrown out 6 years ago, the one he'd accused, abandoned, and erased. And now, she was back. Not with bitterness, not with tears, but with his children, and a secret that would ruin him. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 years earlier, the world had looked very different. Victor Reed was the golden boy of Reed Pharmaceuticals. Handsome, brilliant, and freshly appointed as COO by his father, who had spent 4 decades building the company from the ground up. On paper, Victor had it all. But the one thing that made his life feel real, grounded, was Eliza. Eliza, with her coffee-stained notebooks, her messy bun, and her refusal to be impressed by money. They'd met at a bioethics conference, arguing opposite sides of a pharmaceutical patent debate. He thought she was stubborn. She thought he was arrogant. And somehow, that turned into a coffee date, then a weekend trip, then a ring. They were a power couple in the making. He with the corporate empire, she with the moral compass. In their loft apartment in the city, they would stay up late, dreaming of a family. She'd curl up beside him with medical journals, and he'd stroke her back absent-mindedly while sketching out company projections. The plan was to wait a few years before having children. But then life, as it does, surprised them. The pregnancy hadn't been planned. But the moment Eliza saw that faint pink line, everything else faded into the background. She ran through the kitchen, waving the test like a winning lottery ticket. Victor laughed and lifted her off the floor, spinning her, pressing kisses along her neck, promising he'd build her the world. It was the happiest they'd ever been. But nothing gold stays. The miscarriage happened in the 8th week. Sudden, devastating. And it broke something in Eliza that even time couldn't fully mend. She cried quietly at night, gripping the ultrasound photo as if she could bring the heartbeat back through sheer will. Victor tried to be strong, but he didn't know how to carry pain that wasn't his. He buried himself in work. She shrank into herself. It was the first time distance grew between them. And then, the texts happened. Victor found them on her phone by accident. Messages from Julian, his longtime friend and head of development at Reed Pharmaceuticals. Too familiar, too casual, too flirtatious. When he confronted her, she denied everything. Said Julian was just checking in. Said she didn't want to worry him, that she'd confided in Julian because he was gentler about grief. Victor didn't hear compassion in that explanation. He heard betrayal, and in a fit of rage, he did something he would regret for the rest of his life. He told her to get out, no discussion, no hesitation. Just leave and don't come back. She left that night with nothing but a backpack, a wallet, and the secret she hadn't had time or courage to share, that she was pregnant again, with twins. Eliza didn't cry when the cab pulled away from the Reed residence. She didn't scream or beg or look back, not once. She sat in the back seat, hand pressed to her flat stomach, wondering if the flutter she felt was fear or instinct. Her phone buzzed again. Julian calling. She turned it off. Whatever comfort he had once offered was tainted now. Everything was tainted. Her marriage, her name, her sense of safety, gone in a single night. For a week she slept in her car behind a 24-hour laundromat, washing her face in public restrooms, wrapping herself in old sweaters when the temperature dropped. At night she whispered softly to the life growing inside her. Not out of joy, but out of sheer willpower. Hold on. Just hold on. I'm trying. She considered going back to her parents, but pride had a way of weighing more than logic. They had disapproved of Victor from the beginning. Said no good ever came from old money and corporate bloodlines. Showing up now, divorced, pregnant and homeless, would be an admission she wasn't ready to make. Her salvation came in the form of Eleanor Park. Eleanor, a retired nurse turned clinic receptionist, found Eliza passed out in the waiting room, one early morning after she'd come in to ask for prenatal vitamins. Without judgment, she offered a cup of tea, then a place to stay. The guest room smelled like lavender and mothballs. But to Eliza, it was sanctuary. It was Eleanor who sat beside her during the first ultrasound, who held her hand when the doctor said, "Twins, a boy and a girl." Eliza laughed through her tears. "They're going to be brilliant," she whispered, "and safe." In the months that followed, Eleanor introduced her to Dr. Rafael Torres, a researcher and physician with a quiet demeanor and a sharp mind. He ran a small research institute focused on safe medication for maternal care, something Reed Pharmaceuticals had overlooked for years. Eliza started volunteering, then working, then proposing ideas. Dr. Torres saw what Victor once did. Fire, intelligence, relentless drive. But unlike Victor, he didn't try to mold her. He handed her a file one evening. "These are the trial records from Reed's latest hormone supplement," he said. "Take a look. Something's off." Eliza stayed up all night reviewing them, and by dawn, she wasn't just a woman building a new life. She was a woman with a mission, armed with data, betrayal, and something to fight for. The birth was quiet. No fancy hospital suite, no waiting family members outside. Just Eliza, Eleanor, and a midwife named Denise in a softly lit birthing center with lavender oil misting in the air and classical piano playing low in the background. Leo came first, strong-lunged and serious, his tiny fists already clenched, like he had something to prove. Luna followed, serene and wide-eyed, staring up at Eliza as if she already understood the world she'd entered. Eliza held them both, one on each arm, tears tracing down her face, in silence. "They'll never have to beg for love," she whispered, kissing their foreheads. "Not like I did." The next few months blurred, sleepless nights, feedings, endless diaper changes. But with each milestone, Eliza felt her strength returning. She took freelance consulting jobs during the twins' naps, building a savings account under a name no one from the old world would recognize. Then, slowly, with methodical patience, she began to lay the foundation for something bigger. She filed the paperwork for a new company, Phoenix Pharmaceuticals, named not after the bird, but after the woman she had become. Phoenix wasn't about revenge. It was about replacement, filling a gap in the world that Reed Pharmaceuticals had long neglected. Safe, affordable medication for vulnerable patients, for mothers, for children. She hired a team of researchers, women and men like her, overlooked by big pharma giants, but brilliant nonetheless. She worked long nights, often with Luna curled against her chest, and Leo asleep in a playpen by her desk. The lab was modest, the funding modest. But the science, it was revolutionary, and word started to spread. By year 5, Phoenix had a reputation. Quiet, but loud enough to rattle the windows of Reed Pharmaceuticals. And by year 6, they weren't just a whisper. They were a threat. Eliza knew Victor would eventually see her name on a competitor's file. She just didn't expect the first time he saw her again would be at the altar. The day dawned with fanfare. Victor Reed's wedding was the talk of the city. High society, media moguls, and pharmaceutical executives all gathered at the cliffside villa overlooking the Pacific. The sky was a perfect shade of arrogance, clear, blue, untouched. Cameras clicked, champagne flowed. The bride, Sophia Langford, daughter of Reed Pharmaceuticals' legal counsel, wore a gown that shimmered like corporate ambition. Victor stood at the altar, flanked by Julian, his best man, business partner, and longtime enabler. And then, the helicopter. The sound sliced through the ceremony like a blade, the gust of wind sending flower arrangements tumbling and silk veils whipping sideways. The guests turned, shielding their eyes. The doors opened, and out stepped Eliza. She didn't need music. She didn't need an invitation. She stepped onto the red carpet in a fitted black dress that whispered power, each heel click on the stone echoing louder than the collective gasp of the crowd. And beside her, 2 children, a boy and a girl, 6 years old, dressed impeccably, their expressions calm, unreadable. Victor's mouth parted. Not in welcome, not in joy, in recognition. He took a step back. Julian dropped his champagne flute. Sophia's veil fluttered like a white flag of surrender. Eliza didn't smile. She didn't rush. She walked slowly, deliberately, like she was reclaiming a space that had once been hers, and now, without question, was again. She stopped at the edge of the aisle facing Victor. Her voice was calm, unshaken. "Congratulations," she said. "But before you say, 'I do,' I think your children would like to meet their father." And for a moment, the entire world held its breath. Victor's face went pale, then red, then pale again. "You're lying," he said, barely above a whisper. "This is a stunt. You're—" Eliza calmly reached into her clutch and pulled out an envelope. Thick. Official. She handed it to the officiant, who glanced nervously between. The former couple before reading the first line out loud. Paternity results. Subject, Victor Reed. Result, 99.99% match. Gasps rippled through the crowd like aftershocks. Victor staggered back a step. The twins, Leo and Luna, stood silent, watching the man who had once banished their mother to the cold now tremble under sunlight. Julian tried to intervene, stepping forward. "This isn't the time or place, Eliza." But Eliza didn't look at him. She looked directly at Sophia. "I didn't come to ruin your day," she said, her voice steady. That part was already set in motion 6 years ago. When your fiancé threw his pregnant wife out in the rain without so much as a second thought. Sophia's face crumpled as she turned to Victor. Is it true? You knew she was pregnant? Victor opened his mouth, but no words came. Only shame. Eliza turned back. To the children. Leo, Luna, say hello to your father. Luna's voice was soft. Hi, Dad. Leo's was stronger. Mom said you used to be nice, but nice people don't throw families away. The crowd fell silent. Eliza turned and walked away, the twins following close behind, leaving stunned silence in their wake, only broken by the fluttering of Sophia's veil landing on the grass. Victor didn't move. He couldn't. Because in that single moment, everything he thought he'd buried came back, not just as memory, but as living, breathing consequence. And now the truth was no longer a secret. It had a face. Two, actually. And both called him Dad. Victor didn't sleep that night. He sat alone in his study, surrounded by the hushed ticking of the grandfather clock and the fading scent of champagne from a celebration that never happened. The walls, lined with degrees, accolades, and portraits of polished perfection, suddenly felt like a gallery of lies. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Sophia. We need to talk. You should have told me the truth. He didn't reply. Instead, he stared at the photo that had once sat proudly on his desk. He and Eliza, smiling on the steps of their first apartment, her head on his shoulder, his arm protectively around her. He hadn't looked at it in years. In that photo, they were broke, but happy. And then, almost as if summoned by regret, another message arrived, this time from an unknown number. Check your email. You're going to want to see what your company's been hiding. Victor's heart dropped. He opened his laptop, his hands trembling. An anonymous folder shared via encrypted link. Inside, spreadsheets, memos, whistleblower reports, details about Reed Pharmaceuticals' latest drug trial. Side, effects buried, test groups falsified. A signature at the bottom of one approval form caught his eye. Julian D. Langford. Victor slammed the laptop shut, his breath shallow. He stood and paced the room. This wasn't just about Eliza anymore. It was about his legacy, his company, and how much of it had been built on lies. Then came the knock on the door. Victor froze. It opened slowly, and there stood Eliza, not as the woman he remembered, but as the storm he had never seen coming. You didn't just lose your wife, she said, calm as moonlight. You lost the right to call yourself a man of integrity, and tomorrow morning your investors, your board, and the FDA will all know why. Victor took a step back. You're the whistleblower. No, Eliza said. I'm the consequence. And with that, she turned and left. Again. But this time she wasn't walking away from something. She was walking toward something bigger. And Victor, for the first time in his charmed life, had no idea how to stop it. Victor didn't show up to work the next day. The boardroom of Reed Pharmaceuticals was already swarming with whispers by the time the sun came up. At 8 a.m. sharp, 2 federal agents walked through the glass doors of the building, suits crisp, expressions unreadable. By 8:15, Julian had been escorted from his office, his phone and laptop seized. By 8:30, Sophia's assistant was seen crying in the hallway, refusing to say a word. The dominoes had begun to fall. Eliza, meanwhile, stood across the street in a cafe, stirring her tea without touching it. Across from her sat Eleanor, calm and composed, her silver hair tucked neatly into a low bun. You know they'll try to paint you as the bitter ex-wife, Eleanor said softly. Eliza smiled. then let them. Bitterness only works if there's still a wound. And is there? Eliza looked out the window, where Reed Pharmaceuticals' glass tower shimmered under the morning light, like a mirage ready to crack. No, she said. Now there's only clarity. That afternoon, Victor finally called. Where are you? He asked, voice hollow. I'm not hiding, Eliza replied. I never was. There was a long pause. Then he said, I want to see Leo and Luna. Eliza hesitated, but only for a second. They'll be at the park tomorrow, noon. If you show up high on pride or low on lies, don't bother. He didn't argue. The next day, under the shade of the same oak tree where Eliza had once sat crying, Victor arrived. He didn't wear a suit. He didn't bring a lawyer, just a baseball glove, a children's book, and a look on his face Eliza hadn't seen in years. Uncertainty. Leo was cautious. Luna stood behind her mother. But slowly, as Victor knelt down and opened the book, his voice gentle, his eyes soft, something cracked. A silence broke. A thread of possibility stitched itself between them. Later, as the kids chased each other across the grass, Eliza sat beside Victor on the bench. You know, he said, I thought I was the Empire, the name, the legacy. But it turns out I was just a man with a lot to lose. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. They sat there, watching the sun stretch long shadows across the grass, not as lovers, not as enemies, but as two people who'd finally learned how to tell the truth to themselves and to the children they both owed a future to, and maybe that's what healing really looks like. It's not dramatic. It doesn't happen in a single moment. It's a quiet decision to keep showing up. For your kids, for your peace, for the version of yourself who deserved better and waited patiently. Eliza didn't return to ruin anyone. She came back to reclaim herself. And in doing so, she reminded us all that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming whole. If this story stirred something in you, if you've ever had to rise after being cast aside, then you're already stronger than you know. Leave a comment below. Tell me what part of Eliza's journey moved you most. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Because tomorrow, I have something waiting just for you. A story about a woman who lost everything until she found herself. We'll see you then. And remember, you are not what they did to you. You are what you choose to do next.